Just like that, we're already on lesson 3, well on your way to becoming a Bubble development expert here in the next few days if you keep up this pace. So let's get into the elements here on the left side of the screen. We're not going to cover all of them. We're going to cover the main ones that you're going to be using a lot and skip over the ones that you'll probably never use. So text box is pretty self-explanatory, so I'm going to skip over that. You input text, you drag it on the screen, and text appears. Buttons, we saw that in the previous lessons, and we'll go right into icons. Icons are going to be used a lot, way more than you think in your applications. So it's important you know kind of what they are, what they do. But basically, Bubble has pre-designed icons for you, so you can select any of these, and an icon will display. Now, there's also plugins you can use for more kind of like customized icons, I would say. Maybe a little bit more detailed ones, but Bubble's basic ones are pretty good, so you don't really need to go playing around with icons too much. You can also change the color to whatever you like, so fully customizable icons, just drag and drop over, is a gift. So let's move on from icons and go to links. Now, links you're going to be seeing quite a bit too. You may not notice this when you're looking at websites until now, when you start learning kind of how development works a little bit. For example, if we went to Airbnb, you kind of just look at this and you're like, all right, great, it's a text box, but really it's a different type of component known as a link component. So if you click this, it takes you to another page, of course, as we would expect. So let's go back to Bubble. So let's see what this link does. So if we enter text, for example, we enter my website. Now, this is important to understand. This does not need to be the link itself, but whatever text you want to appear. So for example, this doesn't say airbnb.com/whatever. It says learn about guest favorites, the most loved homes on Airbnb. That's what we're doing over here. So for our example, we say my website, and then you'll be able to click on that and input a URL. So right now it's linked to an internal page. That is not what we want to do. But if you did want to do something like this and navigate throughout your own application, you would just simply select the page you want it to go to. And Bubble gives us the predefined pages of index, a reset password page, and a 404. So if we wanted to go to either of those pages or create a new page for it to go to, we could definitely do that. But for our purposes, we want to test an external URL. Now, the URL you enter is exactly where it's going to go. So WGMI labs.com. Spelled that incorrectly. There we go. And let's test it. Let's go to preview. Let's click my website. And you can see it goes to the website it was supposed to go to. So great, that works perfectly. Let's go back to our index page here. So in the link editor, you're going to be seeing a couple other options along with the URL itself. Now you see the open and new tab option first. This is going to be the one you're using the most. In fact, you probably won't even use this other two. Just read that. This element isn't clickable on a link component. You know, maybe we need to talk to Bubble's development team about that one. I don't see a need for that. Nonetheless, let's continue on, and we'll get into style attributes in a little bit, but let's move through a couple more elements first. So let's look at the video component really quick, and you simply just drag that over like you would any other element, and you can embed a video directly on your site. Now, it comes predefined with YouTube and Vimeo as video sources. However, you can upload your own video as well. And again, you'll see a few various options here, such as play the video automatically on load or replay video when over, as well as the style attributes for videos. Moving down the list, we have HTML code. We're going to go ahead and skip over that for now, but essentially that's where you can embed custom code in your application. Map is a pre-designed map for you. This is actually a pretty cool feature that Bubble has to offer, directly dragging a Google map and embedding it on your website. If you were doing that with code, that would take so much longer. We just did it here in a nanosecond. So that's pretty amazing. There's also a bunch of features that you can do with it. We'll get into those down the road, so don't worry about those for now. And then we can go into our containers. These are what's going to be holding all of the elements as we discussed in our first video. So this will act as a parent container if we were to drag all of this inside. Now all of these components inside are now children. They are each other's siblings, and this group A is now the parent component. So that's usually what you do with groups. And again, it's important to note that you will have a family tree of elements. So you'll have multiple groups within multiple groups within multiple groups, once you're done building your application, and that's going to be normal. It's going to seem tedious when you're doing it, but that's just what you need to do to make everything work as expected. Moving down, we have our input forms. These are just various things that you probably already are familiar with, such as an input box, checkboxes, a drop-down selection, search box, radio buttons, etc., etc. But what I really want to get into now is the actual design of the elements. So let's delete all these. Let's come over and select a few buttons. And I'll tell you why we're selecting a few buttons in a second. It will make sense. But we have 2 buttons here. Let's actually copy this button so they're the same. And we'll put them right next to each other. Let's get into designing these buttons. So you come down here and you've seen style attribute. We've been skipping over this, but let's get into it a little bit. So you see here we have edit style and detach style. Now when you detach style, you can see that this pops up and gives us all the options to style it directly in our component. That's great when you're dealing with single components, right? But when you're dealing with a ton of components and some of those components are going to be having the same style, you don't want to detach. So for example, we come over to this undetached style, and we're going to go over into primary button. The reason we want to do this is because then we can assign the same design to every button we want. So we only have to do the design once instead of multiple times for multiple different components. So let's get into what that looks like. We'll come to primary button and we'll edit the style. Now this is going to be the design editor. This is where you have all of your components and the pre-built styles that Bubble has for you. Now we're going to be changing the primary button so we can see what that looks like when we can assign it to multiple elements. So let's change our button color. We'll go ahead and make it a red button. And then we'll make the text inside, we'll give it a bluish color. Great, now let's change the size of that. We'll increase the size to 24 pixels. We can also move it from left to right or keep it center, as well as bold and italicize, things of that nature. We can also do things such as gradient. Now, gradient's a pretty cool feature, and when you have clients and applications that require a lot of cool styling, Bubble allows this. So we'll have gradient, and we'll keep it linear, and you can play around with these on your own. In fact, I encourage you always to be building alongside me instead of just watching and taking notes. Actually have this out and build it alongside me. You're going to retain a lot more when you do that. So let's start with a top gradient direction, and we'll say the starting color is red. So you can already see what's happening here. It starts as a very prevalent red, and then it comes down to this gray section. So it goes through the whole color palette in order to get from red to gray, and you can change that. So as we move this around, you can see the color changing. If we came over to more of a green color, you can see kind of what that looks like. Now we have this cool gradient color. You can also change this intermediate color. So you see this line in the middle. So you can do a bunch of cool things when it comes to styling your components. And I recommend, again, you play around with this yourself so you can see all the capabilities. But let's go through a few more together. We'll come over and select a, let's do a dashed border. And we want the roundness to be 10. Now, what is roundness? Roundness is going to be the corners of your element. So when we pick a 20 roundness, you can see it's very round. When we pick a 1, you barely notice a difference. Now, if we picked a 100 roundness, almost starts to form a circle. What would 500 look like? Doesn't even go to 500. I learned that just along with you. 200, let's just do a test. 101. It looks like 100 is the max. I'm glad I could learn that along with you. Now I know that. So 100 is the max you can go with your roundness. And here's the width of the button. The width of the border. So you see when I changed that width to 10, the border got massive. And you can see the dotted border as it displays around the button. Usually we're not going to have a border that big, so we'll keep it at 1. And we can change the color of the border, but you probably won't notice it too much unless we do increase that width back to something like 10. So let's leave that at 1 just because that looks ugly, and we'll go to white. And actually, we're just going to take the border off. So let's move down to shadowing. Now, what is shadowing? Shadowing is going to be what appears behind the element itself to give it a shadow or blur effect around the element. Let's see what that looks like. Let's change the color from white to a dark blue color, just so we can see it very clearly what's happening here. So you can see it's very prevalent. It's not really blurred. It looks kind of ugly, but we want to fix that. And let's play around with these numbers to see what they do. So when everything's 0, of course, you're not going to see anything. A horizontal offset and vertical offset just means you're moving the shadow either to the right, left, or up and down. But we want it right in the center for now. So let's give a blur radius of 16. Now you can see it's very blurry. It looks like kind of a shadow. Now let's change the blur radius and see what happens. So we go from 16 to 10. I can see it gets tighter and tighter as we go down, but it almost looks a little less blurred. So you see it's a little bit more defined. Usually when you're doing this, you're going to want to have it pretty tight with the component itself because you're trying to give it that lift off the page effect. So if we stick with something like 5, it almost looks like the element is floating off the page a little bit, and we'll be able to see it better once we get to the editor. In fact, now that we have this set up like this, let's go to the editor and see what's happening. So you can see it almost looks like it's elevated off the page a little bit. While this button looks flat on the page in 2D, you can almost see that this is a 3D button. Now, the reason we just did that and didn't detach the style is because we would have to do everything over again that we just did. So say we come over here and we come to edit. If we didn't do it under a style attribute, we would have to redo everything we just did. But now all we have to do is select primary button, and you can see the buttons are identical. So we could apply this to any button that we drag on is going to have that primary button style, and you can make multiple styles. So we could have button 1, button 2, button 3, each having their own style, and you can still detach when you need to customize a specific button. This is going to be very important later as you're going to have tons of components on your application. And another big thing to consider is naming. Once you have tons and tons of components on your application, it gets confusing as to which one is which. So if you just have primary button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you're going to forget which does what. So it's important that you name them specifically to what they are doing. So in this example, we would name it something like red to green button, or primary button 1, and we just know that that's our primary. Or we do Christmas button, something that you're going to know what it is so you can easily apply it to future components. Now, it's important to note, too, that this is not just for buttons. This is just the example we used it for, but you can do this with any element you see on the left side and give each one their own style, and you'll be able to apply those to each of the elements. You now have a full understanding of everything when it comes to design and UI in Bubble. Now I want to go into one of the most important videos of this course, which is going to be the introduction to workflow, and that's what's going to be making these buttons actually do something. So go grab that coffee, take a walk, and sit right back down because we're going to get into workflows.